right, we're super excited to be chatting today with the amazing Tiffany Hitz. Tiffany, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I'm glad to talk with you.
Awesome. And for anybody here who is listening, who maybe does not know your name, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about your teaching background and performing background?
Yeah, I'm a middle school band teacher in Fairfax, Virginia, just outside of DC. And I've been teaching at Carson Middle School, but I'm actually about to start a new school at Robinson Secondary School, still teaching middle school band. I've been doing that for a long time. I really love middle school. And I'm a horn player. And I started on clarinet and I was a switcher like many of our horn players in schools are. And it was the right choice for me. It ended up being the perfect fit.
Fantastic. And of course, like many of us on here who are listening to this, a lot of us, I'm sure, are elementary and middle school band directors. I've taught middle school myself, absolutely loved it. And so I know this will be a really exciting conversation to talk all things horn for our middle school students. So, can we just start by just talking about a characteristic sound on the horn and how you might describe a characteristic tone versus perhaps an uncharacteristic tone that we don't want our students to be achieving?
I think the starting point for me, I think it is actually a little bit situationally dependent for horn, because horn is such a versatile instrument. And if you listen to professional horn players, depending on the style of music, depending on the ensemble, what the composer is, if we go back like historically listening to orchestral music, it can be really dependent. But I think for our purposes as teachers, I like to think of the sound as being really round and it and warm and open and resonant. And I think I talk to my students a lot about the what the sound would look like if it took on a form as it came out of their instrument. And I think for horns, I kind of think about like almost like a bubble filling up out the back of their horn and then just sweeping out into the room. But I think that that really dark warm sound is typically what we're going for with our students.
Mentioned earlier that you were a switcher when you
Yeah.
started on horn, and this is going to be something that's pretty unique to that. Could we maybe just talk about that for a little bit and talk about the students in your program that you have started on horn or the students that you've switched before? Could you maybe talk about that process and some of the things that you might be looking for and as a student who might be a terrific candidate to play horn?
I mean, to begin with, I think the most important thing is they've got to like the sound of the instrument. It's like any instrument, right? And I know a lot of people probably have really great kind of like a checklist of the student needs this and needs this. And I've talked to people who are like, well, they have to have lessons or they have to do this. I just think they have to really like the sound of it and they have to really want to play it. I do think it lends itself well if you've got a kid that's fairly laid back in the sense that, they're going to let it roll off their shoulders. If they're playing some wrong notes, they're going to lean into that a little bit because we know that, when we're on wrong partials, we can figure out, we learn, well, okay, that's where this sits and things like that. It's not, like as a clarinet player switching from clarinet, I would push a button and I would get, or, close fingerings, whatever, and I would get a particular note. And then on horn, all of a sudden the game changed. But I was not feeling pressurized and I allowed myself that space to not feel, have to feel pressurized about that. I think, it used to be said that like you would look at lip size and teeth, the way the teeth are formed and all those kinds of things. And I think if the desire's there, anybody can figure it out and you can help guide them to that as long as they, I do think there's a healthy amount of like knowing that, there's going to be some challenges and it's okay to not be perfect all the time. And, the willingness to play a wrong note here or there and get better from there.
Remember even in my own classroom whenever we had students that were just starting out on horn and having to really stress because I was teaching not just a class of horns, I was teaching a lot of integrated instruments, but also just stressing to the other students just exactly how difficult it is to get
Yeah.
started on the horn and how much different it is from a trumpet or a trombone or a euphonium. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that, that they really enjoy the instrument and they're going to be ready to really put in and lean into that discomfort a little bit as they get started.
And I would say with switchers, another thing that is helpful is having a buddy. And not even necessarily like an experienced horn player, but having someone else that is switching as well, to kind of go through that together. I think like then also when you hear wrong notes, you know, it takes a little bit of the pressure off of like always feeling like it's me all the time. I'm the one playing the wrong note all the time. So I think at least pairs are good. If you can talk a few kids into doing it.
It's good to have a buddy, you know,
Yeah.
in every
Oh,
facet of life, right?
always.
Could we talk a little bit about now we've identified the students that we are going to be either switching to horn or starting on horn, and can we now talk about just some of the things that we want to make sure that our horn players are doing just right from the start that are going to give them the most characteristic tone?
Yeah. I'm posture, like any instrument, is really, really important. And a big thing that I stress with all my students, but with my horn players as well, is they've got to bring the instrument up to them. So getting them sitting in a great position. And I do a lot of breathing from that position before we even put the instrument up so that we know what that feels like, that we're relaxed, because any type of tension going on, it's going to be the enemy of that great sound for any instrument. So sitting with that great posture, doing a lot of breathing, and then bringing the horn up to them. Um, I think that's really important. And then as a teacher, kind of visually assessing how that student's doing and making adjustments as needed. For example, I really, as a horn player myself, I really prefer to start a kid on a double horn anytime they can. But for some students, my son is playing horn this right now at camp and started, and he's a younger kid, and the double horn was too big and too heavy for him. So he's on a single horn, and it made all the difference. So just kind of assessing that, what they're ready for. Is it too heavy? If for him, he was trying to hold that horn up and it was creating so much tension because it was just a little too heavy and managing it, and he wasn't quite tall enough to be able to manage the bell on the leg, and so he was trying to hold it up, everything. But you can make some adjustments to that as well. I sometimes will put a block under a student's foot, or put a book under their right leg to get their leg up so that they can rest the bell on their knee for starters. Because if it doesn't work out height wise, it either creates a situation where they're leaning down into the horn, or they're leaning way back, and now we have all this tension not just in our abs but in our neck and our throat, in this whole area. And so adjusting any of those seating positions. Don't be shy about like rolling up a towel and putting it on the chair beside them. And for a smaller kid, let them put the bell on the towel for a little while. Hand position is super important for horn, but I don't think it has to be one of the non-negotiables when you're starting. If it's easier for a student to just put their hand flat in the bell to help hold the horn and get everything in position, I think starting out there, and then as they get more experienced, more comfortable with how it feels to support the horn to play, then you can start talking about moving their hand into the correct position. And for me, that is, if I'm looking at the bell branch coming out, that if that's 12 o'clock, I like my hand between 12 and 3, the back of my hand against the back of the bell. And that's so that I play with my horn off my leg. Some people don't. And in that case, your hand can go anywhere along along the perimeter of the bell, as long as you're in a position where you have that cupping. I talked to the kids, they used to, I remember when I started teaching, they liked like the princess wave, the queen wave, and now it's all about brushing teeth, and it's like scooping water in their mouth, make sure there aren't any holes for the water to go through, and then putting their fingers in the bell all the way up to their knuckles, and then just making sure there's a slight angle into their hand position, but not closing the bell off all the way, because then they're creating more tension and more tightness. Um, and making sure that they're on a horn. Each brand of horn, and oftentimes models, have a little bit different structure in how tightly the horn is wrapped or how open the horn is wrapped. Hand positions, some are wider, some are smaller, some of the keys are up higher and some are lower. And so I think visually assessing those things with a student to make sure they're set up on equipment that's going to work for them is really important. We don't need to do anything to make it harder to start on horn, because there's going to be enough challenges when they start just physically playing. but I think don't be shy to make any of those adjustments. I don't think you need to decide that a student can or cannot play horn based on necessarily their body structure or their size. I think that there are ways that we can adjust it to make the horn work for them. But again, it's that like they've got to sit up and they've got to be able to bring the horn to them, however that happens, and whatever you need to do to aid that.
Is there anything that you've noticed over your career where maybe habits that start to creep in as a student matures, maybe not even just a beginning student, but say that you enter into a new job and you have horn players that have been playing for a couple years. Do you notice any trends of bad habits that you occasionally see?
I know for me, even like every year with students that I switched, and I need to keep an eye on their right hand position, because I do think they get, you know, when we're starting and we are on them, reminding them all the time of these things, where to put your hand, how to hold it. I think that's great, but I think as students play, they get a little bit lax with some of those things. And I think at a certain point, we've assumed, okay, I've checked in, I've checked in, I've checked in. Great. Every time I check in, they've got it. But, you know, a month later, it might have crept away. So I think those types of things, like the hand position is a big thing, stay on it.
Mhm.
And if we're looking at a student's their height and their build and how we're going to adjust a horn to them, stay on that as well, because that might change. Um, I like to play with my horn off my leg because I do think it provides more resonance. And sometimes students aren't ready for that at the beginning. And, you know, that's just going to cause an extra level of tension. So I don't have them do it. But then I need to keep watching and assessing so that I know when the right time to add that in is. So I think we just have to, with horn players, we just have to keep revisiting that, and making sure that we are assessing that and helping them understand that, like, there's nothing set in stone. You know, and we just keep making adjustments to help them play the best that they can. But I think probably the right hand position is going to be the biggest thing. And also, I guess in addition to that, um, I teach my students that they need to push their slides in, when they close their cases, so that the slide grease doesn't get linty and dirty. But I find that they either stop doing that, and so they leave them out, and then they stop moving because, you know, it kind of dries up, and or they push them in, and then when they come back after the summer, they forget that they need to pull them back out. So just kind of being mindful of that as well, that, you know, that's it's a moving target sometimes, but you got to keep at those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you mind talking a little bit now just about embouchure and some
Yeah.
of the things that are going to also produce that characteristic sound?
Um, so to begin with, if we're talking about like just general horn players and embouchure for brass players, I'm definitely in the school of thought that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Meaning, if there's a wonky embouchure, if a kid has a wonky embouchure, I mean, my husband has the strangest tuba embouchure of anyone I've ever seen. But he plays great. And if the embouchure provides the sound and it makes the range accessible that you need, I think you don't need to worry about it. But if you're starting a student or you're switching a student, I'm definitely a believer of the 2/3 top lip, 1/3 bottom lip. I think when you're switching a student from another brass instrument, I often think it's easier to switch a student from flute or clarinet to horn than it is to switch a trumpet player to horn. Although I do know that that's a fairly common switch. But with other brass instruments where it's more 50-50 and the mouthpiece comes more straight on, um, horn is so different than that. And because the lead pipe does come up at an angle, there is, while there's contact with all of your lips, there's definitely the weight distribution is, I feel like, a little bit more on the bottom lip than on the top for horn, whereas other brass instruments, you might argue it's either even or a little more on the top. So I think watch out for that. But if you're switching a kid, or if they're starting that 2/3 top, 1/3 bottom, I draw a lot of pictures of that to kind of help them see. And I give them mirrors. I have a stack of mirrors that um, that have magnets on the back. You can get them at the dollar store. It's so awesome. And I put them on the stands. We do a lot of mouthpiece buzzing. And not that I don't want students to push in, but it's kind of like on clarinet. If they squeeze for a minute and lift up, they should see those complete holes, right? If horn players are playing in the right spot, they should be able to pull away and very quickly be able to see a ring that kind of connects that bow at the top of their lip. To see that roundness over there and not see it inside their lip. If it is too low, unless again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But if it's too low, it can. I know a lot of times when I'm working with trumpet players that switch, immediately they do great range wise, but it's short lived because those muscles fatigue so quickly, and the horn mouthpiece, the rim is so thin that I think getting that 1/3 bottom and 2/3 up at the top, that offset, I think that is really important. Mouthpiece visualizers are great for that. And I encourage everybody to have, I have a 2-sided one that has a tuba mouthpiece and size, and a euphonium trombone on the other side. And then I have one that is just, it's trumpet, but it's basically the same ring. It's just a little more comfortable for horns, but using that and letting the kids see that, because you can just spray them and wash them and that's great. But I think that's one thing to watch out for. And a lot of times, if I'm starting lessons with a student, or I get a student who already played horn and everything's fine, I just leave it. But if I'm starting someone or switching them, I definitely am really pushing to make sure that mouthpiece, the lead pipe, comes slight angle 2/3 on top. I mean, that's pretty important. Now, you know, that could change again, like if your teeth are set differently or something like that. So again, it's that individual assessment, but as a general rule, I like that.
All right, Tiffany. So, do you mind talking a little bit about some of the common performance errors that you find with young horn players that get in the way of them making their best sound?
I think one of the things, and I think it's because, and especially people that teach in situations that I do, where I just teach full ensembles. I don't teach instrument classes. And I think, I mean, let's be, let's be real about it. Like, we're usually, the kids who usually want to play horn, who are willing to take that on, are usually pretty great kids, and they're pretty responsible. And a lot of times we give them a book and say, all right, dive in. But the fingering chart for horns, it's so complicated. And I think students need more guidance with that. I think if you just leave them with the fingering chart, they're like, wait, when, and especially, it only if they have a double horn, right? But like, when do I use my thumb? When do I not use my thumb? Because in most of the method books, it gives you both fingerings, because there are some single horn that are F and single horns that are B flat. So I actually provide my students with a fingering chart that is the full range of the instruments. And then I highlight that middle part, which is where they're playing. And I don't give them choices. I just say, this is how you're going to play that note. And I tell them not to use the fingering charts in the book, which again are like, they're great. There's not a problem with it. It's in the discerning how to read it for a student. So I think that is key, because there are reasons to be on F horn versus B flat horn. And there's, the different place on the harmonic series is going to give you a different resonance. And sometimes we're like forcing fingerings that aren't, it's the fingering that works, but it isn't the best fingering, and it doesn't provide the best pitch or the best tone, the most open sound. So I think that's one big thing. And we talked a little bit about like having slides pushed in all the way, then you're just fighting it. Brass instruments are not meant to have slides pushed in all the way. Not one instrument is meant to have slides pushed in all the way, but students get it from the case. And, it's these things that are so natural to us as teachers and as performers. It's just a thing that we do. And sometimes when we have all those things that we do, we forget that there was a time when we didn't know to do that. And it's hard to kind of harken back to those types of memories. So making sure the slides are not pushed in all the way. And as a general rule for horn, some of the horns, I know, especially the Holton horns, usually have it's almost like a different color in the metal where it's like kind of a little area. But I usually tell kids just take your like your pinky and like a pinky width to start for those slides. Um maybe an issue would be like whether their bell is on or off their leg. Maybe they're trying to pull it off their leg because they see an older student or they have a private teacher and that's how they play, and so students thinking that's what they need to do, but it can create problems, it can create tension. And often it can create them, again, they're arching their back trying to hold it up because their arms are not strong enough and they're trying to do everything with their arms, so they really lean into their lower back to try to support it. That can cause a lot of tension issues and problems. And then putting the bell facing where the bell goes is so important on horn, and we don't talk about it enough. We talk about it with trumpet and we talk about it with trombone, because those are very clearly directional brass instruments and the sound is going right out your bell wherever it is. And horn, it seems so nebulous because it's like, well, the sound goes behind me and how does it get out there? And but we do have to guide that. And I think, again, it's that setup and kids like being able to bring the horn to them. And if they're not set up correctly, if their leg's in the wrong spot, if the horn's not the right size wrap for them, I see a lot of kids where they turn the horn and they've got the bell right into their body. Great, sounds awesome for your sweatshirt, and then all of your sound is sucked up and like we don't get your sound. And that's why we play horn. We play horn because it is such a glorious, majestic sound, but the sound gets sucked in, so we have to make sure the bell is out, that the sound is going out, and that our hand is kind of guiding that. Hand positions, and we talked about just double checking that. Too far in and too far out, too far out isn't doing anything. It's not guiding the sound. It's just, you might as well not have it in. But a lot of students put it too far in or just kind of crunch it up and they think they've got to go far, far, far. And then it gets really stuffy. So I think a check for that is just, listen to your kids play by themselves, and you'll be able to tell a lot of that. You'll be able to tell if they're pinching here and they're too tight here, or if they're pushed in with their hand pretty easily. And one thing that I think I hear a lot is just the tension in the sound. And I just mentioned the embouchure, but it's really hard when you start or switch to horn to play unison with everyone else. And I think I think it's something that's mentioned to us as teachers, and we notice it because we've got all these method books that have like horn only exercises, just horn only and oboe only, right, to start us in better ranges. But I think teachers can go a step further and rewrite parts. Listen to kids. I feel like some kids, in my experience, some kids play higher notes more easily, some play lower notes more easily, and some play middle register more easily. And I think the best service you can do for a budding young horn player is figure out where their comfort zone is, where they are the most secure and strongest and most comfortable, and then help them grow from there. But it might mean that you're going to have to rewrite some things. I do that all the time. When we do a Remington or an F stretch or whatever with all of my bands, I have the horns play the trumpet notes all the time. And a lot of times I will give younger horn players, I'll just give them to any kind of chorale or warm up or, anything. I guess not chorale, I shouldn't say that. To any warm up, to any kind of unison exercise, I'll just give them the trumpet part, because it generally sits in a much better range for them until I know where they are. And so that's that listening piece of, assessing when they're ready to move on. But giving them buddies, I usually have the altos and the horns start on a concert C when everybody else starts on a concert F. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take long for them to get used to it. But that helps them solidify the skills where they're good and build their embouchure strength and work on blowing fast, relaxed, really wonderful air to get those sounds before we start asking them to play in other ranges. I was a kid who, when middle school is not a problem, but in high school and in college, I feel like at the beginning, like I was presented with all this music that I probably wasn't quite ready to play. And I just figured out how to do it. And I created some poor habits for myself. And that I had to go back and relearn because I was just trying to like, I was trying to do my part for the ensembles I was in. I was trying to, do well at my job, but it helped me in those moments and it didn't help me long term. So I think anything we can do to help students not feel like they have to build those, and they don't think they do, but to have them not build poor habits, and keep your eye on the prize. The prize is not today, the prize is lifelong learning and loving of music and potentially playing horn forever. So helping them kind of meet them where they are range wise, I think is a really big thing. And it avoids so much of that pinching and tightness. And it allows them to focus on air and it allows them to focus on relaxation, which I just think is really, it's really what we need.
Tiffany, this has all been so fantastic, and I love hearing you talk about just all the things that you're doing with these horn players, meeting them where they're at, doing all the things to make them figure out what they do well, and then building from that. Do you mind talking about some other things that you do with your horns that just continue to reinforce, check in, and build upon their characteristic tone?
Yeah. Well, one thing, and I do think while this is about pitches, I think this is applicable to tone because it helps them use their ear. Like we play the horn that we physically play, and then we play the horn in our head. And I think it's really important for horn players to be able to audiate pitches, or at least to be able to just discern patterns. And they've got to know, they've got to look at a note and go, is it up, is it higher or lower? Is it a lot higher or a lot lower, a little higher, a little lower? And so helping them with those patterns so that they have some confidence, because otherwise playing horn can really feel, I'm not being dramatic, it can feel like you're playing darts with a blindfold.
Mhm.
Um, and how do I even know if I'm right? A teacher a long time ago called it for me home base. I make all my horn players C-E-G-E-C, play that triad right below the staff, C below the staff, and we call that home base, and they have to play it and play it and play it. And then they use that kind of as target practice, and we pick a pitch. Okay, you're going to play an A. They start with C-E-G-E-C, and then they work their way to A. So they make sure they know where they're at to begin with. So they can get a little more confidence of like, I'm not just guessing. And I do encourage them to go ahead and try, if they need to find a pitch before we start, like even in full band, just like pop your hand up. And as a horn player, I know what you need is a minute to find that note, or you need me to play it on the harmony director or model it or something. So I think that like giving them a system, whatever your system wants to be, of like helping them start on the right note, because so often if they start on the right note and they're skilled at being able to track higher, lower, little, lot, and their fingerings are on point, then just finding that starting note it makes all the difference. So I think that's really important. Modeling, I think, is great. And if you're a horn player, if you want to work on horn with students, I think that's always great. If there's an instrument, I think as a teacher, it's important that we understand what it is that the students are dealing with. When I was a beginning teacher and I was teaching elementary band, so it wasn't that hard to do. It'd certainly be more difficult now for me with middle school music, but I set a goal for myself that I wasn't going to ask the kids to do anything that I couldn't do on their instruments. And by me making sure I could do it on all the instruments, it helped me know, well, what are the issues here? When the saxes are going down low, why is that hard? And how are they going to need to adjust and things like that? So if you're not, if a teacher is not skilled at horn, that might be something that they want to take on as their challenge, which could be really cool. And then they can model for them, okay, I'm going to find this note and then here we go. But with or without that, you have to listen to people playing that instrument. You have to find like, start out with like giving students, here are a couple examples of some great horn players or great horn sections that I want you to listen to, so that they have a concept in their head of what that sound should sound like. I think that's the greatest way for someone to sound characteristic on their instrument, is to have a concept in their head of what it should sound like. And it can't be it really can't be just another sixth grader. That can't be the model that they're aiming for. It's got to be way up there. Because why not give them that incredible model to begin with? So I think that's something that can really help. I know what I started doing a couple years ago and continue to work on is created like a little YouTube channel for each instrument. And, at different times, it can be an assignment. It can be hey, just for fun. If you're doing something else in class, pull out your laptop and put your headphones on and listen to this, however you can get them listening. And then what I've loved is that I kind of point them in that direction, and then they come back to me with also like, here are some people I really loved. And I think that's great. I think it's great for them. Not only are they listening to music, but they're listening to their instrument. And it creates that extra like ownership of like, this is what my instrument sounds like. And I think even if they don't sound that way, I think they start to feel like they do. And I think the more confident and more successful they feel in sounding like that, the more they're able to replicate that without thinking, because it just becomes part of how they hear the instrument, part of how they hear the horn.
I want to highlight two things that you said because it's something that has come up in so many of the videos that all instruments are going to benefit from. But of course, the first thing is what Tiffany was just talking about with having your students be able to listen to really high quality players. I forget who it was in our series, but who talked about having recordings playing while students are walking into the band room. While they're getting their instrument together. I remember in my own classroom, I would rotate throughout, and so I would start with flute and just go down in score order. And every day there was something unique. And then the further on into the year, we would start to transition to listening to full ensembles, and so they're starting to get a full ensemble sonority in there. So that's something that everybody can do right away, is just make that a part of your routine. If your students are walking into the room to get their instrument together, have recordings playing. The second thing is exactly what Kim Bain talked about in her saxophone video, which is that anytime that she has something and of course, and many of you know, I student taught with her, but she's very big on, if you're going to ask the students to do something, make sure it's something that you do yourself. And so I think if you're really trying to build your pedagogy in one instrument, pick one instrument a semester or for a year or for 9 weeks, and just really dive into that. Don't feel like you have to go and learn every instrument all at once, because it may be a frustrating experience. But if you could just do something that you can do to and get better at your horn pedagogy or even your trumpet pedagogy, whatever that may be, I think that's something that can be beneficial to you and of course to your students.
Talking about the playing recordings, one plan that I put in place in my planning for my new school, and I know not everyone has, time structure or things like that, but I do play recordings. I tend to play recordings that are more geared toward the music we're playing, or music that is similar to that, though I want to work to branch that out. But I'm going to pick a different video for every Friday, a performance video, because
Cool.
it's so I think sometimes kids don't even know that there are all these options, and they spend all this time on YouTube and on the internet, and they don't know that there's this whole world they can uncover. And I'm hoping by getting them to do that. My school is right near George Mason. We're so close to DC. We have all these service bands. I'm hoping to build in them a greater interest and comfort in attending live performances. And I think just, building familiarity with listening to people perform, I think is a great step towards getting them to see that as, oh yeah, this is something we do.
Absolutely. And it's, you and I are both in places. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and you being where you are, we're surrounded by just so many opportunities for our students to do that. And if you're in an area, if you're listening to this and you're in an area that maybe it's not as close to you to be able to go do that stuff, there's just so many resources that our students have just on YouTube. And so anything that you can do to just continue to introduce it, and they will, as Tiffany mentioned, they will become their own private investigators to go off and search for more things. Students are very good with that, I've learned. Tiffany, thank you so very much for sharing all this information with us. We appreciate it so much, and just thank you so much.
Thank you for talking with me.